Enter the palace. The Jaha Palace was rife with melancholy and vulnerability as the governor screamed from one part of the chamber to another. No one could hold him back, not even Jenna. She had deserted the home earlier with her guards, cherishing to create something with Roesha. The princess had been vigilant to return to her dad because she was suspicious of his welcome. Her discovery had not surprised her, it had allowed her mind to be receptive to queries. She was sure that they spiked the 3 arrows soaked in Roesha with venom, and if they had not been fused with toxin, she had no chance to survive. Perhaps she was a Yarivet, or something richer. For the first time in her reality, Jenna felt intimidated by another supernatural. She just had to find out what her cousin was. That way, she would be crushed. You need to settle down, Keith. Kirk Traina sent the guides away and sealed a gate to the terrace. This was their secret place of meeting, and no one else could overhear what they deliberated. Keith moved towards the bar to get a sip to settle his nerves. Word about the latest meeting at the estate had traveled like wildfire to other parts of Dun. The story had it that the princess had broken into the camp and ascended with her mother. He believed the words because Maya was a Yarivet, so it was likely that Roesha had inherited that part from her mother. He still believed that his brother's child hadn't died from Jenna's arrows after getting the truth out of Dr. Nicholas. Roesha was the last self-healer, and her blood could repair damages in other people. Therefore, she was immortal. How am I going to get out of this? Keith winced as he listened to the chants of his people outside the palace. The Dunnians had held back tear rage and bitterness towards him all these years, knowing there was no other power that could rescue them. But they had the second rebellion now. A force stronger than the first rising. To make matters worse, the lost Princess Grace had joined them. The people now knew about his existence and were eager to take him down. Keith abandoned the bar and moved to a glass window of the garden, which opened to outside. He ran his eyes across the turbulent crowd that had marched towards the Jaha Palace. It broke these people. They were tired of his rule and were ready to surrender their lives. At that point, Keith understood he had failed. Father. Jenna placed a soft hand upon her dad's back. She had sobbed enough after realizing she had missed the opportunity to kill Roesha. This is my entire fault. I'm sorry that I failed you. Just give me one more chance and I would bring her to justice. Jenna begged. Her father had taken the soldiers assigned to her and asked them to join the Dun force. He did not know what the rebels were up to, but he could no longer underestimate them now that the princess was part of the team. What if she had helped outside the planet? What if the G5 were working with her and pretending to fight against her? The study of being defeated by Roesha scared him. Keith pulled back from the horror outside. Never had he imagined the people would gain the audacity to carry out a protest against him. This isn't about you, Jenna. There are some things that I didn't share about your cousin, and you must know them now. She isn't as fragile as I perceived her to be. He paused and stared at Kirk Traina. Jenna raised her brows and stared at the two men. What are you not telling me? She took off her bow and dropped it on floor of the garden. Roesha cannot die. She is a Yarivet and a self-healer. She is the first Sanda with these two gifts. Roesha is immortal. So there was nothing you could have done to take her life. He explained. This didn't make Jenna to feel better. She had always yearned for her father's admiration by doing things that were worthwhile. She made a silent vow to find Roesha and subdue her somehow. I do not believe that there are immortals. Every supernatural has a weakness. We just have to research to find what her weakness is. Jenna replied. Keith wasn't patient enough to consider this. The first thing that they had to do was find Roesha. She escaped with her mother. Who knows what they're planning? I do not care for her powers now. I want her to be caught and we must all put our hands together to track her. Keith returned. Already, he had interviewed some soldiers that had been present at the plantation while Roesha had escaped, but they couldn't provide concrete information about her whereabouts. I think we should just relax. What we have now is enough for us to work with. Kirk had to wait in before his friend would go crazy from worrying. He pulled in a deep breath and tapped the governor on the hand, asking him to rest because he had worked too much. They had not finished with the G5 problem, now something else had stepped in. Keith pushed his hand away. I have nothing to work with. We've to find her, because if we fail too. He swallowed the words which were best imagined. The former Queen of Dun had been mistreated and sent to the freezer. She would recount everything that had happened to her. If Roesha wasn't already hardened, she would be worse. Her cry for vengeance would be doubled, and that wasn't a good thing for Keith Sanda. Of course we've something to work with. The princess is working with the rebels. We need to find out more about them, that is how we'll trap her before weakening her. Keith pulled in a deep breath and focused his thoughts on another matter that worried him. He was yet to forgive Danny Vashek, the Finian that had betrayed him. Have you found anything on Danny? He asked Kirk. The other man shook his head, still working on it. The monitoring team is monitoring the castle at Genderlock. He replied. Keith nodded and waited it out with patience. His wife was siding with her mother, the ruler of the Ascenders who stood against his government. He was losing patience with Catherine, and he hoped she would come to stand by his side in this battle. Jenna could see the frown on his brows. She knew the part that her mother played in this matter, and she was rather disappointed. Dad, you don't have to worry much. I'll travel to Genderlock and speak with my mother. She must see reasons and join with us to fight against Roesha's family. Genderlock. The silver-haired lady strolled through the open rose garden where young Ascenders trained. She was the oldest and most influential Ascender of Genderlock, all others were subject to her. Since Keith's rule began 20 years ago, they had hunted her people like other groups in Dun that had rejected Keith's dictatorial rule. The good thing was that his wife, Catherine Sanda, was Lady Tyra's daughter, and she stood against her husband with her mother. Genderlock was a peaceful district of Dun. It was bright and warm, with the golden sun displaying its different radiant shades. Purple flowers grew on all the pine trees in the region, almost a signature look. These flowers had a sweet vanilla smell that kept the region fragrant and fresh. The day beamed with hope as two women strolled into the rose garden together. One was recovering from the wounds that she had inflicted upon herself while escaping Keith's men. Your place is beautiful. Danny Vashek managed a weak smile as she stared at the golden trees with purple heads. She stole glances at the little children that trained on mats. They sat cross-legged on mats, folding their hands together and staring into the sky. They were practicing fly key, the first lesson of reaching the ascending energy. Danny observed many things about Genderlock and the castle that she had found herself. Back at Jaha, the capital city of Dun, there was noise. If it didn't come from flying spacecrafts, it came from the trade center. There was no peace as abundant as the one she experienced here. She was getting a little bored, but she couldn't deny the power that the silence had over her. Danny had the time to reflect over her wrongdoings. She knew how that she had hurt the little princess, and if the girl was dead, she would pay for it with her blood. Thank you, Danny. Lady Tyra touched her shoulder. She knew the Finian was still worried about Keith and felt regret by the action that she had taken. She will forgive Danny and help her through her pain once she played her part in the downfall of Keith. Your problem began with power. The old lady paused under a tall golden tree. Danny agreed, power is a tricky thing. Sometimes it leads us to evil, sometimes to good. I could never understand it. It is corrupt. Lady Tyra shrugged, perhaps it is corrupt, but in the end, the choice on how to wield it is ours. If you had been content with the position you had, you would never stand with Keith against his own brother. And if it satisfied you with the position that Keith had given to you, you wouldn't have tried to kill Princess Grace or take her mother to the plantation. I hope you learn how to control power. You've a call, Mama. Catherine handed it to her. Who is it? The old woman asked in a gruff voice. It is from the Lunaris. You must take it. It seems urgent. Mother and daughter exchanged a knowing glare, while Tyra shifted a little to a corner at the garden to take the call. Catherine took over from where her mother stopped. So how do you like it here at Genderlock? Catherine grinned. These two women were arch enemies before now. Catherine hated Danny because she saw her as the one influencing Keith to do evil by not telling him the truth to his face. While Danny hated Catherine because of how she despised her husband. They were never friends, and they didn't pretend about it, but they had to be cordial now. Keith had become a common enemy. Lady Tyra pulled off the snail phone from her ears and hurried back to meet the other women. Guess what? She grinned. At once, Catherine and Danny stopped conversing and faced the old lady who seemed to have something important to share. You know I cannot guess to save my life, Mama. Catherine was hesitant to try. Lady Tyra had no choice but to share the secret. There was a minor squabble at the spy's end, but he could share with me splendid news. Princess Grace is alive. Word has traveled through the capital that she saved her mother from the plantation. She has returned to claim her father's throne. We now have someone to support against Keith. I hope you're both ready. The others welcomed the news with laughter and cheers. A new age would be reborn once they defeated Keith. They would create a new Dun. They rejoiced because it would wipe evil off the surface of Dun. But Catherine's smile faded when she remembered her only child. If care wasn't taken, Jenna could perish with her father. Danny showed gladness because the guilt she had suffered would fade away, though she knew that neither Maya nor Roesha would forgive her. But she wouldn't relent to work with the women of Genderlock against Keith Sanda, the man that tried to have her killed. The spy had been watching Jordan Moonwalker and his daughter, Shadow, after the visit of the strangers. He had stumbled on a confidential file with a sample at the laboratory. Jordan knew that Lady Tyra was a rich woman and she would pay him for the information supplied. He had called her earlier to share news of the prince's return, which was the trending topic at the planetary radio. But we had interrupted the call when a club smashed into his head. He lay unconscious in the area's dampness which he had answered the call. Warm blood trickled down his face, he tasted of its saltiness. It covered his eyes in darkness, his ears thumped with pain. It felt like his head would split apart. Who could have attacked him? The attack had been so sudden that he failed to scream for help. Perhaps the old lady at the other end of the line would have known that he was in trouble. You've been following me around. Now it's time to die. Jordan Skywalker raised the blade of the sword that he carried around and sank it into the spy's back. The spy died at once, with his blood splashing into Jordan's face. The Moonwalker wiped the reddish smear off his chin and cleaned the edges of the blade with a piece of cloth that he'd found on the spy. He lowered himself and bent down to search the spy to see if he had stolen any important detail from the laboratory. Jordan was working on a plan that would give the Moonwalkers a chance to rule the planet of Dun. The elders knew of his plan and they were in support. Word about it couldn't go out. When he was certain that the spy had nothing on him, he returned the sword back to its hilt and hurried away from the damp area. He had been in a meeting with the elders when one guard alerted him of a strange movement around his office. The Dunnian that he had killed was someone that he least suspected. Good riddance. He moved his lips as he marched back to the hall for the meeting.